This is the Convict Australia podcast. Thank you for tuning in. On a warm summer evening in the Moreton Bay penal settlement, the young Captain Browning was peacefully sleeping in his cabin on board the Caledonia when he was awoken by an alarm. It was around 3:30 a.m. and he struggled to rouse himself from his deep sleep. As he pulled on some clothing, he could hear the thudding sounds of men rushing to the ringing of the bell. Before he knew it, his door was thrust open and a pistol was levelled at his face. Marched out on deck, he discovered that the ship had been taken over by 11 convict men, facilitating their escape from the secondary punishment site of Moreton Bay. Overrunning the crew had been easier than expected, as all but one were fast asleep in their hammocks at the time. The watchkeeper hadn't even noticed them until it was too late. He had sounded the alarm, but the convicts had jumped on deck before the crew could be mustered. The convicts rounded up the crew that was still half asleep, using the weapons they had procured the night before. Captain Browning tried to downplay his role as master of the ship, particularly his knowledge and skills in navigation, but the convicts weren't having it. They demanded he deliver up all weapons on board, which consisted of 2 muskets and 2 pistols. The convict men then began arguing amongst themselves over what to do with the crew. Some wanted them to walk the plank and face certain death, but they were outvoted 7-4. The crew were made to go overboard into the smaller boat instead. Browning made several attempts to join them, but was thwarted. The crew were told to push off and were set adrift without an oar. Browning now feared for his life and continued to try and escape, so the convict pirates tied him to the mast. Once the ship was underway and land was out of sight, the convicts untied Browning and directed him to start steering the ship towards the Navigator Islands. Browning decided to try another tack. He attempted to sympathise with the convicts and convince them that he was independent of the brutal system they were escaping. He told them something along the lines of, quote, "It was a pity for fine young fellows like them to be lagged from their native country, and how natural it was for all men to flee from bondage." End quote. His plan was to gain their confidence in the hope that when they were finished with him, they would set him free. As Browning began to gain their trust, he heard how they had managed to obtain their weapons. According to the pirates, the night before they had taken over his ship, they had tunnelled their way through the sandy ground into the pilot's log hut. One by one, they slipped into the pilot's bedroom while he and a convict servant lay sleeping. In the other room, 4 soldiers also lay sleeping. Avoiding the room with the soldiers, the convicts crept around, stripping the hut of its weapons, and managed to leave with 2 muskets, 3 pistols, and 2 cutlasses. Browning also overheard their plans for once he delivered them to Rotuma Island, which is now known as Fiji. The convicts had heard that English whalers regularly sailed to the islands, so their plan was to stow away in their vessels so that they could get back to England. Browning was now sailing them straight for Rotuma Island. It had been about a week since leaving Moreton Bay. As he tried to allay his fears of what happened to him once they arrived, the pirates began turning on themselves. Evans, Hastings and Smith seemed to be the ringleaders of the party and started to conspire about ridding themselves of 5 of the convicts. Evans called another convict up by the name of John MacDonald and without warning shot MacDonald in the head. Hastings followed suit by shooting a man named William Vaughan, but he only managed to wound him in the hand and gave him a graze to the head. The men chased him around the ship with him crying out for mercy. He made a daring leap overboard, catching one of the ropes, but the other pirates cut the ropes and he fell to his death. Another convict was forced to alight at New Caledonia, where the natives there were known to be cannibals. After their murderous rampage, a fierce storm hit their ship, and these brutal men turned to quivering cowards against the pounding waves and gale-force winds. As the ship thrashed about, some of the convict pirates fell to their knees and begged the captain to get them out of there and deliver them safely to land. Browning was so disgusted at them, he told them they would, quote, all go to the devil together, end quote. Want to hear more great stories about convicts? Then grab a copy of Convict Sydney, the real-life stories of 32 prisoners. From Elizabeth Sullivan, who was known about town as the fighting hen of Cook's River, with her flamboyant dress and tough countenance, to Robert Sidaway, who entertained local residents by hosting dramatic performances in his theatre. These colourful characters and their individual experiences offer a broader insight into the daily happenings of Sydney and the convict system. To get your copy, just click on the link in the show notes. Once the storm had passed and Browning was supposed to be asleep, he overheard the convict pirates plotting his death. They all agreed that once he had delivered them safely to their desired location, his life would be terminated. They did concede that Browning was a good man, but their safety had to come first. Browning spent the rest of the night desperately trying to come up with his own plan to save himself. It was evening when they began to approach the end point. Browning skillfully sailed straight past the island and sailed the Caledonia into one of the small islands nearby. He allowed the natives to board the ship and take them all into their custody. Browning was closely watched by the pirates, so he couldn't impart to the chief that he was a hostage of the pirate crew. The chief gifted them 2 casks of water and 3 of his womenfolk for their journey to the Wallis Islands. Before they left, though, one of the convicts, Henry Halfpenny, escaped in Rotuma, deciding to take his chances there than with the rest of them. During their journey there, 3 of the pirates named Watson, Hogg and Smith confided in Browning that Evans was planning to scuttle the ship at Wallis Island with him and the 3 women on board. The 3 pirates also expressed their fear that they were going to be shot by Evans. Browning sailed straight past Wallis Island and made for Fortuna. Upon landing, they exchanged goods with the local native people, receiving pigs and fruit. On the 29th of February, they set sail again and shortly after arrived in waters of Survey in Samoa. It was here that the pirates began tearing the Caledonia apart. They used crowbars and anything else they could get their hands on and destroyed the ship. Browning begged them to spare the vessel, but it was of no use. Browning, Watson, Hogg and Smith thought their time was up, but Evans ordered them to help pack things onto the small boat. Browning managed to save a violin to take with them too. The ship sank and the men made their way to shore. When they arrived, the native people were extremely welcoming, particularly when the pirates explained that they had been shipwrecked. Browning was very respectful of their culture, joining in on their customs and even playing the violin and teaching them to dance in the European style. The Samoans offered him their special root drink called kava, but Browning politely declined. Browning was overwhelmed by their kindness and wanted to tell them the real reason he was there, but he was still being closely watched by the pirates. The day after landing, Watson, Hogg and Smith approached Browning, telling him that they were leaving with the boat, and asked him if he wanted to come with them. Browning declined, saying that he intended on getting on the first vessel that came by. 8 days passed, and the old men sailed into view. Browning, along with the pirates, took a canoe out to the vessel, and the captain of the boat asked them individually who the master of the Caledonia had been. Browning answered that it had been him. Evans, however, also said that he was the master. The chief officer then made inquiries with the natives and the men and soon discovered what was really afoot. Evans was immediately placed in irons. The rest of the pirates made their escape with the help of some of the natives. When the Oldman left the shores and was out in the heavy seas, Evans took his opportunity and jumped overboard, preferring to die than be brought to Sydney again. Along the way, the Oldham fell in with the American ship Milo, and Browning asked to be transferred as it was bound directly for Sydney, and he was eager to get back as soon as possible. This was an extremely fortunate turn of events for Browning, because soon after he said goodbye to the Oldham, it was captured near Wallis Island, and everyone on board was murdered. The crew on the Milo turned out to be very friendly, and when Browning fell sick, they helped nurse him back to health. On Monday, the 14th of May, 1832, the American ship Milo glided into Sydney with Captain Browning on board. He was in a weak state, but happy to be back. What became of the other convicts who managed to escape, we'll never know. Captain Browning did make it back to the South Pacific, and he married a Fijian princess and worked as a shipbuilder for some years. Well, that's the last episode of Season 1. I really hope you enjoyed it. I'll be taking a short break and I'll be back before you know it. Till next time. Thank you for listening to the Convict Australia podcast. If you'd like to show your appreciation and get more involved, there are a number of ways you can. The first is by signing up to Convict Australia on Patreon, and you will get some perks like the Convict Australia Newsletter. Secondly, leave a review and tell your friends and family. This really does make a huge difference. And lastly, join the Facebook and Instagram group Convict Australia. All the links I've mentioned will be in the show notes. Thank you again. Till next time.